In the gilded halls of the 19th century aristocracy, marriages were contracts, and love was a currency few could afford. We are told tales of grand balls and fairy tale romances, but what of the secrets that festered behind the polished veneer? This is the story of Alistair Beaumont, the formidable Duke of Blackwood, a man who possessed everything but trust. To uncover the truth about the woman he was bound to marry, he committed the ultimate deception. He became a servant in her home. But the truth he sought was a poisoned chalice. He listened in the shadows, waiting for a sign of her character, and what he heard would not only break his heart, but shatter his entire world. Stay with me, as we unravel a story of lies, sacrifice, and a love that had to be destroyed before it could ever be born. Alistair Beaumont, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, was a man forged in duty and suspicion. His title was ancient, his fortune immense, and his countenance so severe it could curdle milk. His parents' marriage had been a notorious disaster, a union of convenience that had dissolved into cold, bitter resentment, played out in the silent, echoing halls of Blackwood Manor. Alistair, their only child, had been a solitary observer of this polite, soul-crushing warfare. He swore he would never suffer the same fate. He would marry, as a duke must, but his duchess would be a partner, a confidant, a woman of impeccable character, not another gilded statue with a hollow heart. His betrothal to Lady Seraphina Covington was, on paper, perfect. She was the daughter of the esteemed Earl of Ashworth, renowned for her beauty, grace, and quiet dignity. The match would unite two influential families. Society approved. His late father's advisers were ecstatic, but Alistair was haunted by whispers. Rumours, subtle as smoke, had reached him from the London season. Tales of Lady Seraphina's ambition, her cool calculation. They said she was a flawless diamond, but a cold one, with her eyes fixed firmly on the Blackwood coronet and the fortune that came with it. He could not, would not, bind himself to a woman who saw him merely as a title. The memory of his mother's avarice was too fresh, too painful. So he devised a plan as audacious as it was desperate. He would observe Lady Seraphina not as a suitor from across a ballroom, but up close, where the mask of nobility was sure to slip. He would become a ghost in her home. His most trusted confidant, Mr. Elias Abernathy, a valet who had served him since boyhood, was appalled. "Your Grace, it is unthinkable. A duke polishing silver and fetching shawls? The risk of discovery is catastrophic." "The risk of a miserable life is greater, Abernathy," Alistair had replied, his jaw set like granite. "I need to know the truth of her. Not the curated version presented at tea, but the woman who exists when no one of importance is watching." And so the plan was set in motion. Abernathy, using his network of connections below stairs, learned that the Covington household was temporarily in need of a footman. The Earl's health was frail, and their staff was stretched thin, preparing for the Duke of Blackwood's official visit in a fortnight. It was the perfect opportunity. Alistair Beaumont vanished. In his place was Arthur Vance, a strapping, sombre man with calloused hands, courtesy of a week of hard labour in his own stables, and downcast eyes. His ducal signet ring was locked away, his tailored coats replaced with plain, dark livery. His commanding posture was stooped into one of deference, and his voice, which could command the House of Lords, was lowered to a respectful murmur. Abernathy had coached him relentlessly on the intricate etiquette of service: when to speak, when to be invisible, how to address everyone from the housekeeper to the scullery maid. He arrived at Covington Manor on a crisp autumn afternoon. The estate, while beautiful, bore the subtle marks of faded glory. The stone facade was magnificent, but a discerning eye could spot the creeping ivy that needed trimming, the slight wear on the window frames. The grandeur was there, but it was tired, like a dowager clinging to the memory of her youth. His first glimpse of Lady Seraphina was not in a grand drawing room, but in the gardens. She was not dressed in fine silks, but a simple muslin gown, her famous golden hair pinned back loosely. She was speaking to the head gardener, Mr. Davies, about a patch of wilting roses. "It is the blight, my lady," the old man sighed, his shoulders slumped. "I fear we will lose the entire bed." Alistair, tasked with carrying a crate of supplies to the kitchens, paused just out of sight. He expected a dismissive wave, an aristocratic shrug. Instead, Seraphina knelt, her dress brushing the damp earth, and touched a blighted leaf with a gentleness that surprised him. "Nonsense, Davies," she said, her voice softer than he'd imagined. "My mother adored these roses. We will not surrender them. We will fight. What is it they need? A new mulch? A different watering schedule? We shall consult the botany journals in the library. We will save them together." The gardener's face lit up with a grateful smile. Alistair felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected. Hope. She was not the ice queen of rumour. She was kind to her servants, passionate about her garden. He watched as she walked back towards the house, her expression thoughtful, a small smudge of dirt on her cheek. For a moment, she was not Lady Seraphina, the celebrated beauty. She was just a young woman, worried about roses. Over the next few days, Alistair, now Arthur, observed her constantly. He served her tea, stood silently in the corner of the dining room during family meals, and carried letters to and from her private study. He saw her patience with her frail, often irritable father, the Earl. He saw her sharing a quiet joke with her younger sister, Isabel, making the girl erupt in a fit of giggles. He saw her poring over the household account books late into the night, a frown creasing her brow. Everything he saw contradicted the rumours. She was dutiful, kind, intelligent, and deeply devoted to her family. The hope in his chest began to swell. He had been a fool to doubt her. The gossips of London were nothing but jealous vipers. He began to feel a profound sense of guilt for his deception, even as a quiet excitement took root. Perhaps this arranged marriage would not be a prison after all. Perhaps, with a woman like this, it could even be a blessing. He allowed himself to imagine a future with her, a future of shared laughter, of mutual respect, of a partnership that would banish the ghosts of his parents' misery forever. He was ready to end his charade, to return as the Duke and begin their courtship in earnest, his heart now open and willing. He was a fool. He had seen the petals, but he had yet to discover the thorns hidden beneath, and the truth, when it came, would be delivered with the casual cruelty of a whisper, sharp enough to bleed him dry. The third evening of Alistair's service was quiet. A fine, persistent drizzle had descended upon the countryside, tapping against the tall windows of Covington Manor like restless fingers. The family had retired early, the Earl feeling unwell, and a hush had fallen over the great house. Alistair, as Arthur, was tasked with one final duty, ensuring the fires in the main drawing room and the adjoining solarium were properly banked for the night. He moved with the practiced quiet of a servant, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The drawing room was empty, smelling faintly of beeswax and old paper. He tended to the embers, his mind adrift. He thought of Seraphina, of the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of books, of the small, unconscious smile that played on her lips when she listened to her sister play the pianoforte. The calculating socialite he had feared was nowhere to be found. In her place was a woman of substance and warmth. He felt a pang of shame for his intrusion, his cynical test. As he moved towards the solarium, a glass-walled room filled with potted ferns and orchids, he heard voices from within. It was Seraphina and her lady's maid, Ilara, a sharp-eyed young woman who was more friend than servant to her mistress. They were sitting on a small settee, hidden from the doorway by a large potted palm. The soft glow of a single oil lamp cast their figures in silhouette. Alistair froze. He knew he should retreat, that it was a gross violation of privacy to linger. But his original purpose, the very reason he was here, compelled him to stay. This was it. An unguarded moment, a private conversation, the final piece of the puzzle. He flattened himself against the wall in the darkened hallway, just outside the arched entrance, his heart thudding, a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. "He arrives in just over a week," Ilara was saying, her tone laced with a nervous energy. "The Duke of Blackwood. Are you ready, my lady?" There was a long pause. Alistair leaned in, straining to hear. Seraphina's voice, when it came, was stripped of its usual warmth. It was flat, weary, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Ready?" she echoed, a humorless little sound escaping her lips. "One is never ready to be sold, Ilara. One simply endures the auction." The word struck Alistair like a physical blow. "Sold? Auction?" Ilara's voice was softer, more sympathetic. "Oh, my lady, do not say such things. They say he is a respectable man. Not handsome, perhaps, but powerful. He will provide for you. For all of us. He will provide a title and coffers deep enough to drown our debts. That is the service for which I am being purchased," Seraphina stated, her voice as crisp and cold as the night air. "Do not mistake this for a romance, Ilara. This is a matter of survival." Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed hope began to crumble, turning to dust and ash in his chest. Ilara pressed on, a note of pleading in her voice. "But what of the man himself? The Duke? Can you not learn to care for him? Perhaps he has kindness in him." And then came the words that would sever the last thread of hope, the words that would echo in his mind for months to come, a testament to his own monumental foolishness. Seraphina gave a short, sharp sigh of exasperation. "The man? What do I care for the man? I have never met him. I care not if he is kind or cruel, handsome or homely. He is a name, a title, a solution. Alistair Beaumont is a key, Ilara, and I am the lock he must turn to save this family from ruin. Love? Affection? Those are luxuries for dairymaids and merchants' daughters. They have no place in this transaction. My heart is not part of the bargain." Each word was a nail hammered into Alistair's coffin of dreams. A transaction. A solution. My heart is not part of the bargain. He had been wrong. So utterly, devastatingly wrong. The rumors were not just true. They were an understatement. This was not a cold socialite. This was a ruthless pragmatist, a woman who looked at the sacred vow of marriage and saw only a balance sheet. The kindness to the gardener, the affection for her sister, it was all part of the performance, a flawless, beautiful, and utterly hollow performance. She was his mother all over again, but younger, more beautiful, and infinitely more cunning. He felt a sudden, violent urge to stride into that room, to reveal himself and watch the shock and horror dawn on her face. He wanted to throw her callous words back at her, to demand if her family's survival was worth the price of his life's happiness, but he did nothing. A duke did not engage in theatrical screaming matches with servants in the hallway. He was frozen, not by ducal restraint, but by a pain so profound it was paralyzing. It was the agony of a deep, burgeoning hope being brutally extinguished. His heart, which had just begun to open, was now broken. Not a clean break, but a shattering, leaving 1,000 sharp-edged pieces lodged in his soul. He backed away silently, his movements stiff and wooden. He retreated down the corridor, through the great hall, and out a side door into the drizzling rain. He didn't care about the cold or the wet. The chill seeping into his bones was nothing compared to the ice forming around his heart. He stood in the manicured gardens, the very place he had first seen her, and let the rain wash over his face. The scent of damp earth and dying roses filled the air. He had come here seeking the truth, and he had found it. Lady Seraphina Covington was everything he despised. She would marry him for his money and his title, and she would give him nothing of herself in return. The Duke's gambit was over. He had his answer, and as he stood there in the dark, a servant in a borrowed coat with a broken heart, Alistair Beaumont made a new vow. He would honour the contract his family had made. He would marry Lady Seraphina Covington, but he would give her exactly what she expected: a duke, a title, a fortune. The man Alistair would remain locked away forever. She wanted a transaction? He would ensure it was the coldest one of her life. 2 weeks later, Alistair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood, arrived at Covington Manor. He was no longer Arthur Vance, the deferential footman. He was every inch the powerful, imposing aristocrat he was born to be. His carriage was drawn by 4 magnificent black stallions, his livery-clad coachman a testament to his immense wealth. He wore a coat of the finest black wool, tailored to perfection, and his expression was one of polite, impenetrable distance. Seraphina and her family were assembled in the grand entrance hall to greet him. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her eyes, her posture poised, her smile practiced. As he stepped from the carriage and ascended the steps, she performed a flawless curtsy. "Your Grace," she murmured, her gaze lowered. "Welcome to Covington Manor." Alistair looked down at her. He saw the same beautiful face, the same elegant form. But now, he saw through it all. He saw the cold calculation she hid so well. He remembered her words in the solarium. "What do I care for the man?" He took her offered hand. His touch was brief, his grip firm but devoid of any warmth. It was the handshake of a banker sealing a deal. "Lady Seraphina," he said, his voice a low baritone that resonated with authority. It was cool, formal, and utterly impersonal. "A pleasure." He released her hand, as if it were a mere formality he was glad to be rid of. He then greeted her father, the Earl, with the correct degree of respect, and her mother and sister with a curt, efficient nod. Over the next few days, the formal courtship began, and Alistair played his part to perfection. He was the epitome of a dutiful fiancé. He was impeccably mannered, unfailingly correct, and as cold as the marble statues that lined the halls. During their chaperoned walks in the garden, he did not inquire about her favourite flowers or comment on the beauty of the landscape. He discussed crop rotation on his northern estates and the political climate in Parliament. When she tried to draw him out, asking about his childhood or his passions, he would deflect with a vague, dismissive answer before changing the subject back to something impersonal. "You must have fond memories of Blackwood Manor, Your Grace," she ventured one afternoon, as they strolled near the rose garden he had once admired. "It is a significant architectural example of its period," he replied, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "The east wing requires restoration, a costly but necessary endeavour to maintain the integrity of the estate." He did not look at her. He did not ask her what she thought. He made no effort to connect, to find common ground, to be anything more than a business partner discussing a joint venture. Seraphina was utterly bewildered. This was not the man she had been led to expect. The Duke of Blackwood was known for being serious and private, but not for being a walking icicle. She had prepared herself for a formal, perhaps even awkward, courtship. She had not prepared for this wall of sheer, unyielding coldness. He looked at her, but he did not see her. His eyes, a startlingly deep shade of grey, would pass over her face as if she were a piece of furniture. She tried to understand. Was he shy? Was he simply a man of few words? Or did he dislike her? The thought sent a prickle of fear through her. The marriage had to proceed. It was not a choice. It was a necessity. Her family's very survival depended on it. If the Duke were to break the engagement, the scandal would be the final blow. They would be ruined, utterly and completely. Her confusion turned to a quiet desperation. She redoubled her efforts. She researched the political topics he favoured, reading dense parliamentary reports so she could engage him in conversation. He would listen politely, nod, and offer a clinical analysis before falling silent again. She wore her most beautiful gowns, styled her hair to perfection. He never commented, his gaze remaining impassive. One evening, at a small dinner party hosted in his honour, she sat beside him, the scent of her jasmine perfume filling the air between them. A local dignitary was droning on about a property dispute. Under the cover of the table, Serafina's hand, trembling slightly, brushed against his. It was a small, hesitant gesture, an attempt to forge the barest human connection. Alistair's entire body went rigid. He did not pull away immediately. That would have been a public scene. But she felt the muscles in his arm tense, a subtle, violent rejection of her touch. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he shifted slightly in his chair, creating a deliberate space between them. The message was as clear as if he had shouted it. "Do not touch me." Humiliation washed over Serafina, hot and sharp. She felt her cheeks burn and quickly drew her hand back into her lap, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared down at her plate, the food suddenly tasteless. From across the table, she saw the smirking face of Lord Harrington, a neighbouring landowner and a persistent, unwelcome suitor from her past. He had been watching them, his eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. He had seen the Duke's rejection, and he was enjoying her discomfort. Harrington was a man who thrived on the misfortune of others, and he had long suspected the Covingtons' finances were not as stable as they appeared. Later that night, unable to sleep, Serafina stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit grounds. The Duke's coldness was more than just a lack of affection. It felt like a judgment. It was as if he had looked into her soul and found it wanting. But how? He knew nothing of her, of the crushing weight on her shoulders, of the sacrifice she was making, not for ambition, but for love of her family. She was trapped. She was engaged to a man who seemed to despise her, a man who would be her husband, the master of her life. She had braced herself for a loveless marriage, but she had envisioned one of quiet, respectful distance. She had not imagined a union filled with this active, chilling disdain. It was a prison sentence, and the warden was the man she was about to vow to honour for the rest of her life. The great Duke of Blackwood was breaking her spirit before he had even placed his ring upon her finger. Alistair maintained his icy facade with grueling discipline. Each day was a performance. He was the cold, untouchable Duke, and he played the part so well that he began to fear he was losing himself within it. He had wanted to punish her, to give her the transactional marriage she deserved. But watching her navigate his frigid indifference began to stir something unwelcome within him, a sliver of doubt. He had expected her to be pleased with their arrangement. A husband who demanded nothing of her emotionally should have been the ideal scenario for the heartless gold digger he believed her to be. She would have his name and his money, and he would leave her to her own devices. Yet, instead of seeming content, she appeared hurt. He saw it in the flicker of confusion in her eyes when he ignored a direct question about his personal life. He saw it in the slight tremor of her hand as she poured his tea, a hand he had so pointedly rejected. He saw it in the forced brightness of her smile, a brittle thing that never quite reached her eyes. She was not thriving in their cold war. She looked like a flower deprived of sunlight, slowly beginning to wilt. His valet, Abernathy, who had accompanied him to Covington Manor, was not fooled. "You are being cruel, Your Grace," the older man said one evening as he helped Alistair with his cravat. Abernathy was the only person who dared to speak to him with such candor. "I am being what she desires." "A business partner," Alistair retorted, his reflection in the mirror looking back at him with hollow eyes. "No," Abernathy said softly. "You are a man nursing a wound, and you are using your pain as a weapon against a woman who does not understand your war." "I watched her today, sir. I saw her give half her luncheon to the stable boy because she heard his mother was ill. I saw her spend an hour reading to her father, his face alight with a joy I haven't seen in years. These are not the actions of a heartless mercenary." Alistair scoffed, but the words settled uncomfortably in his gut. "A performance, Abernathy. She is clever." "Is she?" the valet challenged. "Or are you, perhaps, so blinded by what you think you know that you are refusing to see the truth in front of you?" A few days later, an incident occurred that carved the first significant crack in Alistair's armor of certainty. He was in the nearby village of Oakhaven, ostensibly to meet with the local magistrate about a tenant dispute on a small parcel of land the Blackwood estate owned nearby. As his carriage passed through the market square, he spotted a familiar figure slipping out of the back door of the town's only reputable jeweler, a Mr. Godfrey. It was Seraphina. She was alone, unchaperoned, and cloaked as if to avoid notice. His mind immediately leapt to the worst conclusion. She was buying some new trinket, already spending his fortune before it was even hers. A surge of bitter vindication rose in him. On impulse, he instructed his driver to stop. He waited until she had disappeared down the street before he entered the jeweller's shop himself. Mr. Godfrey, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, bowed low at the sight of the Duke of Blackwood. "Your Grace, an unexpected honour." Alistair feigned a casual interest in a display of pocket watches. "I believe I just saw Lady Seraphina Covington leaving your establishment," he said, his tone deceptively light. "Looking for a wedding gift for me, I hope." Mr. Godfrey's expression turned sombre. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Ah, not quite, Your Grace. Lady Seraphina was on business of a more private nature." Alistair raised an eyebrow, his silence a command for the man to continue. The jeweller sighed, lowering his voice. "She was selling, Your Grace, not buying. A beautiful piece it was, a sapphire and pearl locket, an heirloom, she said. Belonged to her grandmother." He shook his head sadly. "She drove a hard bargain, but I could tell it pained her deeply to part with it. Said the funds were needed for a family medical expense." Alistair stood frozen, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the shop suddenly deafening. Selling a family heirloom for a medical expense. He remembered the worry lines on her face when she looked at her father. He recalled the late nights she spent hunched over the account books. His conversation with Abernathy echoed in his ears. What if the Covington situation was not just one of fading glory, but of active, desperate crisis? The knowledge sat like a lead weight in his stomach. A woman of her standing, secretly selling her personal treasures in a village shop. It spoke not of greed, but of a profound, humiliating desperation. The cold, calculating monster he had constructed in his mind began to dissolve, replaced by the image of a proud young woman fighting a silent, losing battle. His anger, the righteous fury that had sustained him for weeks, began to curdle into something far more complex and uncomfortable. Doubt. Deep, gnawing doubt. He had heard her words, yes. My heart is not part of the bargain. But context was everything. He had interpreted those words through the lens of his own past, his own fears. What if he had been wrong? What if her statement wasn't a declaration of cold ambition, but a cry of painful resignation? A lament for a heart she had been forced to sacrifice, not one she was unwilling to give? The thought was agonizing. If he was wrong, then his behavior, his calculated coldness, his deliberate cruelty was monstrous. He had been punishing a victim, not a villain. He left the jeweler's shop in a daze, his mind reeling. He had built a fortress around his heart, and the foundation was beginning to crack. He didn't know what the truth was anymore. But he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that the simple, damning story he had told himself was falling apart. And in its place, a much more tragic and complicated picture was beginning to emerge. The annual harvest ball at the estate of Viscount Ashworth, a neighbouring peer, was the pinnacle of the local social season. It was also, Alistair knew, the perfect stage for public observation. He escorted Seraphina, the dutiful fiancée, his arm offered, but his demeanour as remote as ever. Yet, something within him had shifted. He was no longer looking for confirmation of her guilt. He was searching, desperately, for proof of her innocence. Seraphina was a vision in a gown of pale gold, but her smile was strained. She was gracious to the guests, a perfect lady, but Alistair noticed the dark circles under her eyes that powder could not quite conceal. He also noticed the predatory gaze of Lord Harrington, who had been circling her all evening like a vulture. Harrington was a man of moderate title but dubious character, known for his gambling debts and his lecherous pursuits. He had made no secret of his desire for Seraphina before her engagement to the Duke was announced. Now, he seemed to be enjoying her predicament, his eyes holding a smug, proprietary gleam that made Alistair's hands clench into fists at his sides. Later in the evening, needing a respite from the stuffy ballroom, Alistair stepped out onto a secluded stone terrace overlooking the gardens. The cool night air was a welcome relief. He stood in the deep shadows of an archway when he heard footsteps approaching, followed by the low, insistent voice of Lord Harrington. "Seraphina, my dear, a word." Alistair instinctively shrank further into the darkness, his presence concealed. Seraphina's voice was tense. "Lord Harrington, I am afraid I must return to my fiancée." "Oh, the great Duke can spare you for a moment," Harrington sneered, his tone dripping with false familiarity. "In fact, he is precisely who I wish to discuss." There was a pause. "I have nothing to discuss with you, my lord." "Don't you?" Harrington's voice dropped, becoming silky and dangerous. "I am not a fool, Seraphina. I've been watching you, and I've been listening. Rumours of the Earl's failed investments, the mortgages on your land, the hasty sale of your mother's pearls. The pieces fit together rather grimly, don't they?" Alistair's blood ran cold. It was true. Her family was in ruins. Seraphina's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know what you're talking about." Harrington laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, I think you do. You've hooked the biggest fish in the sea, haven't you? The Duke of Blackwood. His fortune will solve all your little problems. But what do you think would happen if his oh-so-proud Grace were to learn that he is not acquiring a pristine bride, but bailing out a bankrupt family on the brink of debtor's prison? He strikes me as a man who despises being made a fool of. The raw cruelty of the threat hung in the air. Alistair felt a surge of protective fury so intense it nearly drove him from the shadows. Harrington was using her family's private agony as a weapon. Serafina was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was no longer trembling. It was forged in ice and fire. "And what is it you want, Lord Harrington?" she asked, her tone lethal. "Simple," he purred. "An alternative. Jilt the Duke. Tell him you have had a change of heart. I am prepared to be generous. I will settle a portion of your father's most pressing debts. In return, you will accept my hand in marriage. Your family will be saved from immediate disgrace, and I will have the most beautiful wife in the county. You would have me trade one cage for another, smaller one," she stated. Not a question, but a fact. "A cage with a much more appreciative zookeeper," Harrington said with a slick chuckle. "Think of it, Serafina. Do you truly wish to be shackled to that block of ice for the rest of your life? I've seen how he looks at you, or rather, through you. With me, you would have passion." Alistair held his breath, his world narrowing to this single, critical moment. This was her chance, a way out, a different path. What would the cold, calculating woman he thought he knew do? Her reply came, swift and sharp as a shard of glass. "Your passion, my lord, is nothing more than greed wrapped in a pathetic disguise. You disgust me." Harrington's tone hardened. Brave words for a woman on the edge of an abyss. "Do not forget, I hold the power to push you over. One word to the Duke, and your precious arrangement will crumble to dust." And then Alistair witnessed the true strength of Lady Serafina Covington. She took a step closer to Harrington, and though her voice was low, it carried the force of a command. "Then say it," she dared, her voice shaking with suppressed rage, not fear. "Go to the Duke. Tell him everything. Tell him my family is destitute. Tell him this marriage is a lifeline we are clinging to with our fingernails. But you will also tell him that I am doing it to save my father from dying in shame, to ensure my sister has a future, and to keep the roof over my mother's head. I am sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. And if he is half the man of honor his title suggests, he might understand that. But you, Lord Harrington, you would never understand loyalty or sacrifice. You understand only leverage and weakness. So go. Tell him. I would rather face his righteous anger than spend a single moment bound to a creature as vile as you." She turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight, her head held high, leaving Harrington sputtering in stunned silence. In the shadows, Alistair leaned against the cold stone wall, his legs suddenly weak. Every word she had spoken was a revelation, dismantling the last remnants of his cynical worldview. Sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. It wasn't a transaction. It was a sacrifice, a noble, heartbreaking, and utterly selfless act of love for her family. The words he had overheard in the solarium, "My heart is not part of the bargain," were not a statement of cold ambition, but a lament of what she was being forced to give up. He had not heard a confession of greed. He had stumbled upon a martyr's private grief, and he, in his arrogance and pain, had judged her, condemned her, and for the past several weeks he had been systematically torturing this brave, cornered, magnificent woman. The shame that washed over him was overwhelming, a physical sickness that twisted in his gut. He was the villain of this story. His coldness, his disdain. It wasn't a righteous punishment. It was a brutal misunderstanding, an injustice of the highest order. He watched her re-enter the ballroom, her mask of polite composure perfectly in place. No one would ever know the battle she had just fought and won on that terrace. No one except him. He knew what he had to do. An apology was not enough. He had to undo the damage he had caused. He had to prove to her that he was not the monster she now believed him to be. He had to find a way to reach the woman of fire and loyalty he had just discovered, the woman he had so terribly, tragically wronged. The harvest ball ended, and the journey back to Covington Manor was a silent, agonizing eternity for Alistair. Seraphina sat opposite him in the carriage, her profile illuminated by the passing moonlight. She looked exhausted, her brave facade having finally crumbled in the privacy of their transport. She believed herself to be trapped, engaged to one cold man and threatened by a vile one. The weight of her world rested on her slender shoulders, and Alistair knew he was the one who had added to that crushing burden. He could not speak. Not here. Not like this. The confession he needed to make required more than a few whispered words in a swaying carriage. It required stripping away every layer of artifice between them, his ducal authority, her ladylike composure, and the terrible lie that had started it all. The next day, he sought her out. He found her in the estate's dusty, forgotten library, a place they had never visited together. She was standing by a window, not reading, but simply staring out at the bleak, wind-swept gardens, looking small and lost amidst the towering shelves of books. "Lady Seraphina," he said softly from the doorway. She started, turning to face him. Her expression was guarded, weary. She was preparing for another bout of his cold indifference. "Your Grace." He walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. He shed the mantle of the Duke, letting his own exhaustion, his own shame, show on his face for the first time. "I need to speak with you, but not as the Duke of Blackwood, and not as his fiancée." He took a deep, unsteadying breath. "I need to speak with you as a man who has made a terrible mistake." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand." "No," he said, his voice thick with regret. "You don't. And that is entirely my fault. Before I came here as your fiancé. I was here before." Her confusion deepened. "Before? But that's impossible. We had never met." "We hadn't," he confirmed, "but I had. My name for a few days was Arthur Vance. I was a footman in your father's service." The color drained from her face. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror, as the implication of his words dawned on her. She took a half-step back, her hand flying to her throat. "The new footman, that was... you?" He nodded, unable to look away from the storm of emotions brewing in her eyes. Shock, humiliation, and a dawning, terrible anger. "Yes." "Why?" she whispered, the word raw with betrayal. "Why would you do such a thing?" "Because I am a coward," he said, the confession costing him everything. "Because my own parents' marriage was a loveless hell, and I was terrified of repeating it. I heard rumors about you in London, that you were ambitious, cold, and I was too cynical to dismiss them. I had to see for myself. So I came here, under a false name, to spy on you." Seraphina stared at him, her entire body trembling. The coldness, the rejection, the weeks of confusion, it all snapped into horrifying focus. He had been judging her. From the very beginning, he had been weighing her worth. "And what did your seeing reveal?" she asked, her voice shaking with a fury that was all the more potent for its quietness. Alistair's own heart broke anew, this time for the pain he was inflicting. "It revealed what a fool I am. One evening I was in the hall by the solarium. I overheard you speaking with your maid, Ilara. He saw the flicker of memory in her eyes, followed by a wave of crushing mortification. She knew exactly what he had heard. "I heard you say," he continued, forcing himself to speak the words that had haunted him, "that you did not care for the man, that the marriage was a transaction, that your heart was not part of the bargain." She flinched as if he had struck her. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shame and rage. "You stood in the dark and listened to my most private, desperate conversation, and you used my words as a weapon against me." "Yes," he admitted, his own voice cracking. "I heard the words, but I was deaf to the meaning. I heard calculation, not sacrifice. I heard greed, not desperation. Last night on the terrace, I heard you with Lord Harrington, and I finally understood." He took a step closer, his hands open at his sides, in a gesture of supplication. "Serafina, I know everything. The debts, your father's health, the sale of your locket. I know you are not marrying me for my title. You are sacrificing yourself for your family. And I, in my blind arrogance, have done nothing but make your sacrifice more painful." Her anger finally broke free, a torrent of righteous fury. You have made me feel worthless. You have looked at me with such contempt that I began to believe I deserved it. I was prepared for a marriage of duty. But you created a prison of ice and silence. Do you have any idea what that has been like? To be bound to a man who so clearly despises you and to have no idea why." "I can only imagine," he said, his voice choked with remorse, "and the thought of it will haunt me for the rest of my days. I was wrong. About everything. I saw your kindness, your grace, your strength, and I chose to believe a lie because it was easier than confronting my own fears. The woman I saw on that terrace, the woman who would rather face ruin than be compromised by a man like Harrington. That woman is extraordinary. She is a woman of honor, of loyalty, of a strength I can barely comprehend." He looked at her, his soul bared. "I am so sorry, Serafina. For the deception, for the cruelty, for judging you when I was the one who was truly without honor." Serafina stood there, tears streaming down her face, her body racked with silent sobs. She was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, the humiliation of being discovered, the fury of being deceived, the sheer, crushing relief of the truth finally being spoken. All the coldness, all the confusion. It had a reason. A terrible, insulting, but understandable reason. He had broken her heart with his coldness. But in this raw, agonizing confession, he was offering her the pieces. "What you heard in the solarium," she said, her voice fragile but firm, "was the truth. My heart, it wasn't part of the bargain. I had locked it away. I believed I had to survive this." "I know," he said softly, "but I am asking you now. Is there any hope of changing the terms of that bargain?" He stood before her, not as the Duke of Blackwood, but as Alastair Beaumont, a flawed, foolish man, profoundly ashamed and utterly in awe of her. All secrets were now out in the open, laid bare on the dusty floor of the library. The deception that had broken them was also, paradoxically, the only thing that could set them free. The silence that followed his question was profound, filled with the weight of all that had been said, and all that had been suffered. Serafina slowly wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, her gaze never leaving his. The anger in her eyes had receded, replaced by a deep, searching weariness. "You ask for hope," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "After weeks of calculated cruelty, after a deception that robbed me of my dignity, you spied on me, judged me, and condemned me without trial." "I did, Alistair affirmed, not flinching from her indictment. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it, if you let me. Atonement is not so easily bought, Your Grace. Then let me earn it, he pleaded, taking another hesitant step closer. Let me start over. Not as the Duke who arrived a fortnight ago, and certainly not as the footman who hid in your shadows. Let us start here, now, as two people who have seen the worst of each other and are, by some miracle, still standing in the same room. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped object. He held it out to her. It was the sapphire and pearl locket she had sold in the village. Her breath hitched. How? I went back to the jeweler, he explained. I told him he had sold it to me in error and paid him triple what he gave you. It is yours. It should never have left you. She stared at the locket in his palm, a symbol of her secret desperation, now returned. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a gesture of profound understanding. He was not just apologizing for his actions. He was trying to heal the wounds that had led her to that desperate place. Slowly, she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his, and this time he did not pull away. His skin was warm, a simple, human warmth that felt like a lifeline. The debts, she whispered, the ever-present weight. The reason for all this will be taken care of, he said firmly but gently. Not as a condition of our marriage, not as a price for a bride, but as a gift. From a man to the family of the woman he wishes to court, properly this time. Your father's honor will be restored. Your family will be secure. You, Seraphina, will be free. She looked up at him, a new, fragile emotion dawning in her eyes. Free. Free to choose, he clarified, his voice filled with an earnestness she had never heard. The engagement contract can be dissolved. There will be no scandal. I will take the blame entirely. You can walk away from me, and I will not say a word. Your family will be safe regardless. Your sacrifice is no longer required. He was offering her an escape, the very thing she had believed impossible. He was giving her back her life, her choice, with no strings attached. It was the most selfless, honorable thing she had ever witnessed. In that moment, she finally saw the man behind the Duke. Not the cold tyrant, not the suspicious spy, but a man who, like her, was afraid. A man who had been wounded by his past and had made a terrible mistake in his effort to protect his future. A man who was willing to humble himself completely for a chance at redemption. A small, genuine smile, the first he had ever seen from her, touched her lips. It was a watery, tremulous thing, but it was real. "And what if I choose not to walk away?" she asked softly. Hope, bright and overwhelming, surged through Alistair's chest. "Then I would be the most fortunate man in all of England," he breathed, "and I would spend my life proving myself worthy of that choice. We would not have a transaction. We would have a partnership. We would build a marriage based not on duty or necessity, but on this terrible, painful, and absolute truth we have found here today." He tentatively reached out, not to take her hand, but to gently touch her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I don't expect you to love me, Seraphina. I don't deserve that yet. But I am asking for the chance to show you the man I am, not the fool I have been. Let me court you, for real. Let us discover each other, with no more secrets." She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. The ice that had encased them for weeks, finally, irrevocably, melted away, leaving in its place the fertile ground for something new to grow. It would not be easy. The scars of his deception and the memory of her sacrifice would take time to fade. But for the first time, their future was not a foregone conclusion written in a contract. It was a blank page, and together they would finally have the chance to write their own story. The story of the Duke who learned to trust, and the lady who was finally free to love. And so, from the ashes of a devastating lie, a fragile truth was born. Alistair and Seraphina's journey was not one of fairy tale romance, but of harsh realities, profound misunderstandings, and the painful, beautiful process of earning forgiveness. Theirs is a reminder that behind every title and beneath every silken gown lies a human heart, capable of both great error and even greater love. What began as a duke's desperate gambit to avoid heartbreak led him directly through it, only to find a love far more real and resilient on the other side, a love founded not on perfection, but on the acceptance of profound flaws. What do you think? Can a relationship truly heal after such a deep betrayal? Is a love born from truth more powerful than one born from duty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by the story of the Duke and his lady, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of history, heartache, and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, so you won't miss our next journey into the dramatic, secret lives of the past. Thank you for listening.